The latest report on food insecurity in Gaza is an appalling indictment of conditions on the ground for civilians. The world's leading experts on food insecurity clearly document that famine in the northern part of Gaza is imminent. More than half of all Palestinians in Gaza, 1.1 million people, have completely exhausted their food supplies and are facing catastrophic hunger, according to the report. Palestinians in Gaza are enduring horrifying levels of hunger and suffering. This is the highest number of people facing catastrophic hunger ever recorded by the Integrated Food Security Classification System anywhere, anytime. This is an entirely man-made disaster, and the report makes clear that it can be halted. Today's report is Exhibit A for the need for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. I call on the Israeli authorities to ensure complete and unfettered access for humanitarian goods throughout Gaza and for the international community to fully support our humanitarian efforts. We must act now to prevent the unthinkable, the unacceptable, and the unjustifiable. Thank you.
Do you have any comments on the attack, on the arrest of our journalists in Gaza?
will start. The 9,579 meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provision agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, nuclear disarmament, and non-proliferation. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General, distinguished ministers, and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provision Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Robert Floyd, Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, and Ms. Golka Muhazanova, Director of the International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program, Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I warmly welcome the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, and give him the floor.
Madam President, Your Excellency, Foreign Minister Kamikawa, distinguished Council members, I thank the government of Japan for convening the Council around the vital issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Japan knows better than any country on earth the brutal cost of nuclear carnage. But almost 8 decades after the incineration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear weapons still represent a clear and present danger to global peace and security. When I launched the disarmament agenda in 2018, I warned that, and I quote, when each country pursues its own security without regard for others, we create global insecurity that threatens us all. Today, we meet at a time when geopolitical tensions and mistrust have escalated the risk of nuclear warfare to its highest point in decades. The doomsday clock is ticking loudly enough for all to hear. From academics and civil society groups calling for an end to the nuclear madness, to Pope Francis, who calls the possession of nuclear arms immoral, to young people across the globe worried for their future, demanding change, to the Hibakusha, the brave survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, among our greatest living examples of speaking truth to power, delivering their timeless message of peace. To Hollywood, where Oppenheimer brought the harsh reality of nuclear doomsday to vivid life for millions around the world. Madam President, humanity cannot survive a sequel of Oppenheimer. Voice after voice, alarm after alarm, survivor after survivor are calling the world back from the brink. And what is the response? States possessing nuclear weapons are absent from the table of dialogue. Investments in the tools of war are outstripping investments in the tools of peace. Arms budgets are growing while diplomacy and development budgets are shrinking. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and domains in cyber and outer space have exposed new vulnerabilities and created new risks. Countries are pouring resources into deadly new nuclear technologies and spreading the threat to new domains. And some statements have raised the prospect of unleashing nuclear hell, threats that we must all denounce with clarity and force. Nuclear weapons are the most destructive weapons ever invented, capable of eliminating all life on Earth. Today, these weapons are growing in power, range, and stealth. An accidental launch is one mistake, one miscalculation, one rash act away. And ultimately, all of humanity will pay the price. A nuclear war must never be waged because a nuclear war can never be won. Excellencies, there is one path and one path only that will vanquish this senseless and suicidal shadow once and for all. We need disarmament now. In fact, eliminating nuclear weapons is the first action called for under the proposed new agenda for peace, our effort to strengthen the tools of prevention and disarmament. We need nuclear weapon states to lead the way across 6 areas. First, we need dialogue. Nuclear weapon states must re-engage in working together to develop transparency and confidence-building measures to prevent any use of a nuclear weapon. This should include measures that address the nexus between nuclear weapons and new technologies and domains. Second, nuclear saber-rattling must stop. Threats to use nuclear weapons in any capacity are unacceptable. Third, nuclear weapon states must reaffirm a moratoria on nuclear testing. This means pledging to avoid taking any actions that would undermine the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, whose entry into force must be a priority. Fourth, disarmament commitments must become action. Nuclear weapon states under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons must reaffirm their commitment to that treaty and to the commitment they have made as states parties. And they should pledge to hold each other accountable to these commitments. Fifth, we need a joint first use agreement. Nuclear weapon states must urgently agree that none of them will be the first to use nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, none should use them in any circumstances. And six, we need reduction in the number of nuclear weapons. This reduction must be led by the holders of the largest nuclear arsenals, the United States and the Russian Federation, who must find a way back to the negotiations table to fully implement the New START treaty and agree on its successor. Excellences, la responsabilité d'agir s'étend également aux États non dotés d'armes nucléaires. Je les engage vivement non seulement à honorer leurs propres obligations en matière de non-prolifération, mais aussi à contribuer aux efforts visant à rendre le désarmement nucléaire vérifiable et irréversible. Aidez-nous à tenir les États dotés d'armes nucléaires comptables de leurs actes. Aidez-nous à consolider l'architecture mondiale du désarmement, en particulier le traité sur la non-prolifération des armes nucléaires et le traité sur l'interdiction des armes nucléaires. Et apportez votre soutien aux activités de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique, ainsi à l'action que nous menons pour donner un second souffle à la conférence de désarmement. Ces dernières années, la conférence est devenue synonyme d'impasse diplomatique et de méthodes de travail dépassées. C'est honteux. Lorsque j'ai pris la parole devant les membres de la conférence le mois dernier, j'ai demandé qu'un nouveau processus intergouvernemental relevant de l'Assemblée générale soit mis en place afin de réformer les organes de désarmement, y compris la conférence. Nous espérons que cela permettrait enfin de convoquer une 4e session extraordinaire de l'Assemblée générale consacrée au désarmement.
Will be an important moment for the world to gather around concrete reforms to the global disarmament architecture and the bodies and institutions that uphold it. Excellencies, across all of these areas, this Security Council has an opportunity to lay down a marker, to look beyond today's divisions and state clearly that living with the existential threat of nuclear weapons is unacceptable. To agree that it is only by working together that the prospect of a nuclear holocaust can be eliminated, and to lead the way to a world free of these instruments of annihilation. It is time. I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for this briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Robert Freud.
President, Your Excellency, Foreign Minister Kamikawa, Secretary General Guterres, distinguished Council members, it's a pleasure to engage again with the Security Council in this chamber where the world's most challenging issues are deliberated. On the 27th of September 2021, I addressed this council under Ireland's presidency on the occasion of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty's 25th anniversary. I return today to brief the Council on CTBTO's work since then, and I'm acutely aware that today's uncertain geopolitical context is even more complex. It's one thing to debate the policy issues raised by weapons of mass destruction. But Madam Chair, it's quite another thing to go to Japan and to visit Hiroshima, to see for yourself one of the two places on Earth where a nuclear bomb was dropped in war. I was there last August. But back on a calm summer's morning, on the 6th of August, 1945, a little boy, 3 years old, is riding his tricycle. A nuclear bomb explodes 600 meters above Hiroshima, the largest, almost instantaneous obliteration of human life ever seen on Earth. Visiting the Peace Memorial Museum now, you see photos of those affected. You see things found afterwards, things you can't forget. That tiny, charred tricycle, found a kilometre away from the centre of the blast. Between 1945 and 1996, when the CTBT was opened for signature, over 2,000 nuclear tests were conducted. Most of them far bigger than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. That bomb had a blast equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. But the largest bomb ever tested, imagine a huge pile, a huge cube of TNT, 50 million tons. That would be a cube 300 meters wide, 300 meters deep, and 300 meters tall, about the height of the Chrysler Building. 50 million tons of TNT. All that power to destroy. Before 1996, 2,000 tests. Since 1996 and the opening for signature of the CTBT, fewer than 12 tests. So what changed? The world decided enough was enough. The CTBT was agreed in 1996, a transformation for the better. But why such a success? Above all, because the treaty is fair and transparent. The treaty prescribes a global network of 337 monitoring facilities. They'll detect any significant explosion anywhere on Earth almost immediately. They monitor seismic activity, sound waves in the oceans, sound waves in the atmosphere, radioactive particles in the air. Their data streams to the CTBTO in Vienna around the clock. That data isn't secret. It's available to all CTBT state signatories, including all of the current Security Council members. and the network is growing. Since my last briefing to the Council, we've certified 4 more stations. That brings the total number of facilities to 306. 2 major national networks have been completed. Both Argentina and the Russian Federation now have established all required facilities within their territory, including stations in some of the world's most extreme environments. We're closing in on our target, but that's not all. Since I last briefed the Council, CTBTO's National Data Centres for All initiative was established, and we've had an excellent response. We're working with more and more states to set up their own national data centres so they can access all of the CTBTO data. It's obvious this fair, transparent treaty is a success that everyone can understand. That's why support for the treaty grows and grows. In 2021, I told you that 185 states had signed the treaty. Now, 187 states have signed the treaty. In 2021, I told you that 170 states had ratified the treaty. As of today, 178 have ratified it. Yes, there was one high-profile de-ratification last year, but 1 step backwards, but 9 steps forward. The trend is clear, strong. In fact, on Wednesday last week, 1 more country ratified the CTBT, proudly declaring its commitment to a world free of nuclear tests. That new ratification by Papua New Guinea is worth celebrating. I thank the government of Papua New Guinea for their valuable contribution to international peace and security. It sustains momentum towards universalization. Something else has changed since 2021. There's a sense of unease and uncertainty prompted by new wars and conflicts. Nuclear weapons are back in the public consciousness, not only thanks to the Oscar-winning Oppenheimer film. There are concerns that one state is accumulating worrying amounts of highly enriched uranium. Reports of increased activity at former nuclear test sites in a number of states. Suggestions that some states might even be considering the use of nuclear weapons. In uncertain times, the best response is a lot more certainty. Our verification system detects any nuclear explosion anywhere on Earth, anytime. However, the treaty envisages more verification tools to further boost transparency, to provide that certainty, to build trust, to dispel any suspicion or allegation about a state testing in secret, so that the world's decision makers, like yourselves, have the facts. The treaty outlines 4 verification tools. Firstly, the international monitoring system, now 90% complete. Secondly, consultation and clarification. Thirdly, confidence building measures. And fourthly, and importantly, on-site inspection. That last one, on-site inspection, is the treaty's crucial practical tool to complement the international monitoring system. It confirms beyond any doubt that an explosion is or is not a nuclear explosion. Certainty through transparency. But until the treaty enters into force, we can't get that certainty through transparency. A lot has changed since I was last here in 2021, but one thing hasn't changed: the case for the CTBT's entry into force. What if we here today agree that the world needs more certainty and trust, so that we would never again see a nuclear weapons indiscriminate destruction? What if we all called for the CTBT to enter into force? What if there's the shared political leadership to push this over the line. That's a world with a lot more security, maybe even more peace. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Floyd for his briefing. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Goka Mossad.
Thank you. Madam President, Secretary General Guterres, ministers, Executive Secretary Floyd, distinguished members of the Council. It is a great honor indeed to address the UN Security Council today on one of the most important and gravest issues facing humanity. I thank the government of Japan and Foreign Minister Kamikawa for the invitation and for including a civil society representative in this meeting. It is a rare occurrence to have an NGO speaker in a meeting such as this, as nuclear weapons-related fora are traditionally inhospitable to formal non-governmental interventions. However, there is a growing recognition that inclusion of diverse stakeholders and perspectives in these discussions provides for a deeper, more holistic understanding of the nuclear weapons problem and improves our collective ability to develop better solutions. Improving gender diversity in particular is also in line with the member states' commitments under the Women in Peace and Security resolutions. Beyond the improved numbers on women's participation, application of gender lens and feminist perspectives can help break the traditional conceptions of power and security associated with nuclear weapons and promote a more human-centered approach. I urge all member states to actively facilitate inclusivity in multilateral fora, including the review process of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Excellencies, as Council members, you receive briefings on many issues, difficult, gruesome, heartbreaking. You hear about wars and human rights violations, terrorist acts and genocide, arms trafficking and proliferation threats. But the briefing the Council has not received and must never receive is one on the effects and consequences of a new use of nuclear weapons. A briefing that could tell of tens of thousands or more killed in the blasts, hundreds of thousands suffering and dying from radiation sickness, burns, and other injuries, millions displaced, and many, many more put at risk of starvation due to the medium and long-term effect on climate, agricultural production, and food markets around the world. This scenario seems unthinkable, and yet today, the risk of nuclear weapon use is higher than it has been in decades. As the norm against the use, the nuclear taboo, is undermined by reckless rhetoric and threats, especially those issued in the context of an active military conflict. The NPT, the foundational instrument of the non-proliferation and disarmament regime, is under tremendous pressure. Nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states are divided over the lack of implementation of nuclear disarmament commitments, while modernization, and in some cases numerical growth of arsenals, sends a message of long-term reliance on nuclear weapons. The majority of UN member states have rejected nuclear weapons by joining the NPT and nuclear weapon-free zones, and more recently by concluding the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But we are now witnessing a recommitment to nuclear weapons, an increase in the value attached to them that challenges the norm against their pursuit and acquisition, and contributes to proliferation pressures. Furthermore, the divisions among the nuclear weapon states are such that the actors whose cooperation is key to achieving outcomes and advancing the goals of the NPT are effectively not talking to each other. Throughout the Cold War, the opposing superpowers were able to agree on the importance of non-proliferation and engagement on arms control, and work together to secure the NPT. That is not the case today. And this is a fundamental challenge to the ability of states parties to agree on a meaningful consensus outcome at the next review conference in 2026. The nuclear weapon states often cite difficult international security environment as reason not to proceed with nuclear disarmament. The conditions are not right. Fair enough, the situation is indeed dire. However, the 5 countries defined as nuclear weapon states under the NPT are also the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, to whom the UN Charter entrusts the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It is this responsibility I want to emphasize and appeal to today, for it is in your hands, more than anyone else's, to make sure that the nuclear taboo holds and that this Council and its future iterations never have to receive the kind of briefing I described earlier. Nuclear risk has been on the mind of countless experts, policymakers, and diplomats in recent years. There has been no shortage of proposals on steps and measures to implement. However, nuclear risk reduction discussions at the NPT review process meetings get bogged down in framing debates. Is it a substitute for nuclear disarmament or its enabler? Are we talking about strategic risks or any risks emanating from nuclear weapons? Important though these questions are, the 2026 review conference cannot spend days going over the same arguments. It would not be productive, and we can only hope it will not be too late. The UN Security Council, specifically its 5 permanent members, should step up now. Recall how encouraging the Council action was in 1995, in the run-up to the indefinite extension of the NPT. Then, the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 984 on assurances against the use of nuclear weapons. Ahead of the 11th review conference, the nuclear weapon states should issue pledges, individually or collectively, on reducing the nuclear risks and formalize them through a UN Security Council resolution, similarly to the Resolution 984. Most importantly, the new resolution should clearly state that nuclear weapons must never be used again under any circumstances. I further urge the nuclear weapon states to include the following commitments: no increase in nuclear arsenals, no new weapon designs, no new deployments of weapons at home or abroad, on Earth or in outer space, no nuclear testing, and no threats to use nuclear weapons. I realize this would be a tall order even in better times, not to mention today's circumstances. But precisely because of how high the stakes are, I call on you to approach it not from the place of balancing and bargaining, but from recognition of your responsibility as nuclear weapon states and permanent members of the UN Security Council. Excellencies, accepting an Oscar for his portrayal of Robert Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy said that we're all living in Oppenheimer's world now, and dedicated his award to the peacemakers everywhere. So if I may, to the UN Security Council members, and particularly the P5, I would like to say, in the world of heightened nuclear threat, be the peacemakers. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Muhammadzanová for her briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan. Excellencies, dear colleagues, I thank you all for joining me today. I also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Dr. Robert Floyd, Ms. Gorka Mahzanova for their insights. Distinguished colleagues, the catastrophes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must never be repeated. Based on this firm belief, Japan is the only country to have ever suffered atomic bombings during war, has been a global leader in the quest to realize a world without nuclear weapons. As part of this endeavor, since 1994, Japan has submitted annual UN General Assembly resolutions on nuclear disarmament, which have been widely supported by the UN membership. At the last NPT review conference, Prime Minister Kishida proposed the Hiroshima Action Plan. Moreover, Japan hosted the G7 summit in Hiroshima last year. On this occasion, not only the G7 leaders, but also the Ukrainian president and representatives of ASEAN, the AU, the PIF, and the G20 deepened their understanding of the realities of the atomic bombing. Their visit to Hiroshima sent a strong message in support of a world without nuclear weapons. Distinguished colleagues, the international security environment is becoming more severe. The international community has become even more divided over how to advance nuclear disarmament. Nevertheless, we must steadily advance realistic and practical efforts toward a world without nuclear weapons. The NPT is a cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Next year, the international group of eminent persons established under Prime Minister Kishida's initiative will issue recommendations for the NPT review conference in 2026. This is why it is extremely relevant and meaningful to hold this briefing today at the Security Council in the midterm year of the NPT review cycle with the participation of both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to stress the following four perspectives. First, the high importance of the 5 actions set forth in the Hiroshima action plans. These are: 1 is a shared recognition on the importance of continuing the record of non-use of nuclear weapons. 2, enhancing transparency. 3, maintaining the decreasing trend of the global nuclear stockpile. 4, securing nuclear non-proliferation and promoting the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And 5, encouraging visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki by international leaders and others. We must implement these actions with an ever greater sense of urgency. Second, Japan will further strengthen and lead to efforts to embody the 5 actions of the Hiroshima Action Plan. As a new step towards that end, I am delighted to announce the establishment of the FMCT Friends. This is a cross-regional group of friends which aims to maintain and enhance political attention towards a fissile material cutoff treaty. The importance of the FMCT in limiting the quantitative improvement of nuclear weapons by banning the production of fissile materials is indisputable. Japan will further increase international and political attention toward an FMCT. Empowering young people is the key for our future. We will create a global network among the youth towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. In this context, Japan welcomes the start of the UN Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, in which future leaders visiting Hiroshima and Nagasaki will learn firsthand of the realities of atomic bombing. In addition, we need to overcome the dichotomy between deterrence and or disarmament. Through the Japan Chair for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, Japan aims to deepen international discussion in this area. Japan promotes further cooperation with international organizations. The IAEA plays an extremely important role in promoting the international nuclear non-proliferation and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Last week, the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi, visited Japan. Japan reaffirmed its commitment to cooperate with the agency to promote peaceful use of nuclear energy, which contributes to the SDGs. Japan fully supports the first nuclear energy summit by the IAEA taking place this week. Third, the international community must be united with one voice against any movement that runs in counter to a world without nuclear weapons. A rapid buildup of nuclear capabilities by certain countries could spark a nuclear arms race. Russia's nuclear threats, let alone any use of nuclear weapons in the context of the situation in Ukraine, are absolutely unacceptable. Japan urges Russia to return to full implementation of the New START treaty. In addition, Japan expresses strong hope for dialogues leading to the development of a broader framework of arms control that covers a wider range of weapon systems with appropriate governance. North Korea has advanced its nuclear and missile activities. It launched ballistic missile yesterday in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Such activities by North Korea threaten the peace and stability of the region and the international community. It is totally unacceptable. Moreover, there is a possibility of further provocations, including a nuclear test. In this context, the role of the 1718 Committee and its panel of experts is critically important, and its function needs to be maintained. With no clear outlook in resolving this nuclear issue, restraint by countries concerned, including Iran, is necessary, particularly in light of the current heightened tension in the Middle East. Furthermore, Japan promotes the implementation of UNSC Resolution 1540 with the aim of preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to non-state actors. During the Cold War, despite the confrontational environment at that time, the international community established legal frameworks to ensure the peaceful and sustainable use of outer space, which prohibit placing nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction in outer space. Even now, Japan firmly believes that outer space must remain a domain free of nuclear weapons and that it is our common responsibility to fully comply with the existing legal frameworks, including the Outer Space Treaty. Fourth, Japan is closely following the possible impact of emerging technologies such as AI on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. In this context, Japan welcomes the commitment to maintain human control and involvement made by the US, UK, and France during the last NPT review conference. Japan strongly calls for other nuclear weapon states to follow this commitment. I stress also the importance of the WPS perspective. We will continue to emphasize the importance of gender perspectives being taken into account in the decision-making process. As Japan has called for in its annual GA resolutions on nuclear disarmament. Distinguished colleagues, I look forward to a vibrant discussion to share ideas and proposals to accelerate concrete actions toward the next NPT review conference. I thank you. I resume my function as President of Council. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Veronica Nathaniel Macomo de Diogo, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cooperation of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to begin our intervention by commending Japan for the initiative of convening this important event that aims to debate a subject that is currently front and center in issues related to global peace, security, and stability. Allow me to convey to this council the warm greetings of His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique. We express our deep gratitude to the President of this session and my sister, Her Excellency Yoko Kamikawa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, for the honorable invitation addressed to Mozambique to participate in this ministerial event. We express our sincere recognition to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, as Secretary General of the United Nations, for the vision, leadership, and courage with which he has led our organization, particularly with regard to the international peace and security agenda. Madam President, for Mozambique, the scheduling of this topic represents an excellent opportunity for the Security Council to reflect in depth on the commitments made by the member states of the United Nations within the framework of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and other international instruments in the field of the global disarmament agenda. We are aware that we are going through a challenging international situation due to the occurrence of complex situations with a direct impact on the architecture of international peace and security. Indeed, in various parts of the world, political and military instability, armed conflicts, poverty, and the effects of climate change, which continue to have a significant and negative impact, challenge efforts to promote peace and development. The situation is exacerbated by the fragmentation and recomposition of non-state groups with access to information and communication technologies that use them for terrorist purposes. Therefore, Mozambique is particularly concerned about the dangerous tendency to construct and disseminate narratives and other acts that generate mistrust, which could lead us to setbacks in our agenda of disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. It is our understanding that the elements of a concrete and practical agenda through which to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict and arms races and strengthen the nuclear non-proliferation treaty include the recognition by all member states that the nuclear status quo that generates instability, distrust, uncertainty, and competition derives from the incoherence between discourse and practice. We say one thing and we do another. In this context, Mozambique is committed to the effective implementation of the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty, also known as the Treaty of Pelindaba. These instruments denote a strong show of support for multilateral approaches to nuclear disarmament and are essential to promoting global security, reducing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and maintaining a safer and more peaceful world. This global commitment is crucial for international peace and security. The international community must continue to work together to achieve a world which is safer and free from nuclear weapons. Mozambique holds the view that the adoption of an assertive and coherent approach between the declared intentions and concrete actions of each of our countries must be based on the certainty that a war using nuclear weapons would have catastrophic consequences for all humanity. We must recognize that if this happens, it would be extremely unfair to all countries and peoples around the world who love peace and deplore nuclear weapons. It would particularly be unfair to Africa, taking into account that none of the 54 African countries possess nuclear weapons. Mozambique, as a country that believes and values international institutions, is in favor of a world that does not gravitate around the doctrine of nuclear deterrence. We are in favor of a world that gives primacy and priority to the development of nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. We therefore want to avail ourselves of this session of the Security Council to recommend that the 11th review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty scheduled for 2026 should consider adopting this approach in its agenda items in light of the political responsibility of current leaders to build a world free of nuclear weapons for future generations. Our children and the future generations deserve to live in a world of peace, harmony, and concord. Madam President, in this context, we would like to address three aspects that we consider important as our contribution. First, the adoption of a balanced approach to the use of nuclear technology, including artificial intelligence, which can translate into the implementation of relevant international legislation and consultations between states. Second, the prioritization of investments in nuclear programs for peaceful purposes with emphasis on energy transition and human medicine. We suggest in particular the creation of a global compact in the form of an incubator through which nuclear knowledge and relevant technology to the progress of humanity are shared in line with the sustainable development goals. Third, the recognition and appreciation of the work of the United Nations Disarmament Commission, the 1540 Committee of 2004, and the International Atomic Energy Agency for the efforts towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. And may they exercise their mandate with impartiality. Support for training and technical assistance can contribute to the institutional capacity building of countries most vulnerable to conflicts. Madam President, Mozambique reiterates its commitment to continue collaborating with international organizations to promote nuclear disarmament with the peaceful use of nuclear energy for sustainable peace in favor of economic and social development. Excellencies, with March being a month dedicated to women, we would like to remind you that in March 2023, during Mozambique's presidency of the Council, we effusively praised the role of women in building and consolidating peace, including in conflict prevention and resolution. We believe that the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation agenda can also be effective if we continue to count on the active involvement of women also assuming a leadership role in this matter. A greater and better inclusion of women in today's pressing challenges and issues such as disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons can contribute to the building of maintenance of peace as well as international development. It is essential to recognize and value the role of women in the search for a safer and more peaceful world. In conclusion, I would like to express a firm conviction that together, each one of us doing their part, we can create a world where humanity can live in peace, security, and harmony. Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor, and I thank everyone else for your attention. Thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. De Rovo for her statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, Permanent Representative of the United States and member of President Biden's cabinet.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by welcoming you here to the Council today and thank Japan for convening this important meeting. Thank you, Secretary General, for your statement, and I'd like to thank the two briefers for their briefings and as well for your recommendations. Around 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy visited American University in Washington, D.C. He was on campus to deliver a commencement address titled A Strategy of Peace. And in it, he outlined not only a plan to curb nuclear arms, but a hopeful path to world peace, despite escalating nuclear armament. Ultimately, he explained, our most common basic link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we're all mortal. Today, 6 decades after Kennedy's landmark address, and 5.5 since the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons entered into force, these links remain, as does the United States' commitment to strengthening and upholding the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime with the NPT at its center. And yet the global framework that has curbed nuclear armament for years is under increasing strain. Iran has continued expanding segments of its nuclear program without any credible civilian justification, and for over 5 years has failed to cooperate with the IAEA. Since launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has irresponsibly invoked dangerous nuclear rhetoric and walked away from several of its arms control obligations. All the while, China has rapidly and opaquely built up and diversified its nuclear weapons stores, and Russia and China have remained unwilling to engage in substantive discussions around arms control or risk reduction. What's more, both countries have defended and even enabled dangerous proliferators. That brings me to the DPRK, which continues its unlawful development of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Just this weekend, you've heard, in fact, we saw multiple DPRK ballistic missile launches testing delivery systems for nuclear weapons. We urge everyone in this council, the 1718 committee's panel of experts, by extending its mandate later this week. Silencing independent and objective experts will not change the reality of the DPRK's efforts. It will only make it more difficult for us to address this threat. Colleagues, it is not just these individual actors putting a strain on the global non-proliferation regime. Today, our existing regime faces new and evolving challenges, like artificial intelligence, which can be hacked or malfunction, be misinterpreted, or provide misinformation. My hope is that today we can take stock of the challenges posed by these new technologies, and more importantly, commit to addressing them. In order to do that, it is critical that every member of this council reaffirm their commitment to an objective I believe we all want to see: a world without nuclear weapons, with undiminished security for all. So how do we get there? At a basic level, we must comply with existing nuclear arms control obligations and engage constructively on potential new ones. The United States is willing to engage in bilateral arms control discussions with Russia and China right now without preconditions. All they have to do is say yes and come to the table in good faith. States with nuclear weapons must also maintain a moratorium on explosive nuclear testing and support the monitoring capabilities outlined by Dr. Floyd today. In addition to forestall a potential arms race, we need to see an end to the production of fissile material for use in nuclear weapons and continue pursuing negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty. Today, we announced that we are officially among Japan's Friends of the FMCT Coalition, a group dedicated to seeing this treaty adopted. Colleagues, there's more we must do to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons states must provide transparency into their programs and engage with one another to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict. The United States has modeled this transparency and cooperation and will continue to press for both. We must empower all those with the potential to leverage technology for good and minimize its harmful effects, including women who are frequently left out of the conversation around non-proliferation. We must hold would-be proliferators to account and fully implement relevant Security Council resolutions, including by supporting subsidiary bodies like the 1718 and 5040 committees, the latter of which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. We must identify and implement measures around new technologies like those outlined in the U.S. proposed political declaration on the responsible military use of AI and autonomy, which already has over 50 co-sponsors. And then there's the issue of outer space and the treaty governing it. Let me be clear. Any placement of nuclear weapons into orbit around the Earth would be unprecedented, dangerous, and unacceptable. States parties must commit to upholding our obligations under Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, and we must urge all member states who are not yet party to it to accede to it without delay. And today I can announce that together with Japan, the United States put forward a Security Council resolution reaffirming the fundamental obligations that parties have under this treaty, and further calling on member states to not develop any nuclear weapons or other kinds of weapons of mass destruction that are specifically designed to be placed in orbit around Earth. We look forward to engaging with this council to forge consensus around this text. And outside of the council, we're interested in engaging with state parties to the Outer Space Treaty to explore ways to increase confidence in compliance with Article 4. The United States has already begun considering approaches to help ensure that countries cannot deploy nuclear weapons in orbit undetected. And we intend to engage with other state parties as our ideas evolve. Colleagues, 60 years ago, the world faced a choice: escalation toward nuclear war or cooperation and non-proliferation. Today, as we face that same choice, we must not allow our differences to prevent us from taking action on this critical matter of international security. In the words of President Kennedy, confident and unafraid we labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but toward a strategy of peace. The United States will continue to lead by example, in good faith, and with all council members and member states in that pursuit. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Thomas Greenfield for her statement. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Frances Piaggi Algali, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, I thank you for convening this high-level briefing on the critical issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Let me also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Mr. Robert Floyd, and Ms. Gorka Mokadzanova for their valuable and informative briefings. Sierra Leone commends Japan for its leadership in convening this important meeting and look forward to engaging in constructive discussions aimed at enhancing international peace and security in a nuclear-free world. Madam President, at the outset, Sierra Leone recalls that in January 1947, the Council accepted as one of its most urgent tasks the global elimination of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction in line with General Assembly Resolution 41-1, underlining that the general reduction of armaments and armed forces was an important measure to strengthen and maintain international peace and security. Regrettably, events overtook the early Security Council WMD initiatives, ending the Council's substantive work on the regulation of armaments based on Article 26. Sierra Leone commends the General Assembly, as envisaged in the UN Charter, for stepping in and being instrumental over the years in the adoption of treaties regulating WMD, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017. Sierra Leone reiterates that the NPT is the cornerstone of the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture and a key instrument in the efforts to halt vertical and horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons, an essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament. It has been a historic success, and Sierra Leone is encouraged by the progress made on pillars 2 and 3 of the treaty. However, we are concerned that the nuclear disarmament pillar has made very slow and disappointing overall progress. Sierra Leone reiterates that nuclear disarmament continues to be of the highest priority, and the total elimination of nuclear weapons is the only guarantee against the use or threat of use. Therefore, we reiterate our call for a balanced implementation of the 3 pillars of the NPT. While we commend the Council, including many countries and organizations, for their tireless efforts in taking initiatives to tackle non-proliferation and WMDs over the years, Sierra Leone deplores that since 2010, the level of Council engagement on disarmament has fallen, and debates on general disarmament and its role in the maintenance of international peace and security are few and far between. This high-level briefing on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation presents a timely and significant opportunity for the international community to reaffirm its commitment to advancing the goals of disarmament and non-proliferation. Madam President, the recent developments in the global nuclear landscape underscore the urgent need for collective action to address the escalating risks associated with nuclear weapons. The picture of the growing nuclear risks is grim and gravely concerning. In this regard, we know that there is extensive modernization of nuclear arsenals, as reported in 2023, increasing military expenditure, halt of the strategic stability dialogue between the 2 major nuclear weapon states, withdrawal from the 2010 New START Treaty, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement, capping strategic nuclear forces of the 2 major nuclear weapon states, and the negotiations for a successor to the New START Treaty being put on hold. There is no gainsaying that a nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought. However, the possession of nearly all of the world's more than 12,000 nuclear weapons by a minute number of member states, along with the recent rhetoric threatening to use them, remains a significant concern. Despite a long-standing legal obligation to eliminate nuclear weapons, certain member states continue to invest heavily in their nuclear arsenal without advancing any meaningful solutions for disarmament. We also note with alarm the escalation of missile capabilities, increased plutonium production, along with uranium enrichment activities of certain states. Furthermore, we note the failure of 2 consecutive NPT review conferences, setbacks faced by preparatory committee for the 2026 NPT review conference in the first session, and the failure of the Conference on Disarmament to agree on a program of work, preventing it from initiating substantive deliberations. In the light of growing tensions among nuclear armed states and the heightened threat perceptions resulting from recent geopolitical developments, it is imperative that the Security Council takes decisive steps to address these challenges and mitigate the risks of nuclear conflict. Madam President, while some nuclear weapon states would argue that with the current prevailing circumstances, the security environment is not conducive for nuclear disarmament or the total elimination of nuclear weapons, Sierra Leone, as a non-nuclear weapon state, advanced that it is for the very same reason of global security tensions, threat of use, and the possibility of miscalculations that nuclear disarmament must remain the highest priority and must begin now. The continued possession of nuclear weapons and the endorsement of nuclear deterrence perpetuate instability and insecurity for all nations. Instead of preventing their usage, nuclear deterrence policies have enabled conflict and heightened the risk of nuclear weapons use. The specter of nuclear catastrophe looms over major conflicts in the region, such as Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Korean Peninsula. The only effective way to prevent the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is through their total elimination. This necessitates rejecting the dangerous theories of nuclear deterrence. Sierra Leone calls on all nuclear weapon states to engage bilaterally and multilaterally to make nuclear disarmament a reality and to unequivocally commit to transparent, complete, verifiable, irreversible, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament. In this context, Sierra Leone welcomes the entry into force of the landmark treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons on 22nd January 2022. Sierra Leone is encouraged by the steady progress of the TPNW. To date, 93 states have signed the TPNW, including Sierra Leone, and 70 have ratified or acceded to it. The meetings of state parties to the TPNW, including the most recent one in November 2023, have advanced an ambitious action plan towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. My delegation believes that the TPNW serves as a complementary instrument to the NPT and will end the long impasse in multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations. Sierra Leone therefore calls on all states to support and join the TPNW as a matter of urgency to advance the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Additionally, Sierra Leone expresses concern over NWS that have not signed or ratified the CTBT 28 years since establishment, thus hampering its entry into force. We urge member states who have revoked their ratification to rejoin the CTBT. Sierra Leone welcomes the adoption of Resolution 2310 in 2016 and urges all states that have not either signed nor ratified the CTBT to do so without further delay. Sierra Leone recommends that the Security Council considers issuing a presidential statement or resolution that outlines concrete confidence-building measures to reduce the threat of nuclear war and delineate strategies for advancing nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Such a council product could serve as a catalyst for renewed international efforts to promote disarmament and enhance global security. Furthermore, Sierra Leone recommends the Security Council task the Secretary General with preparing a comprehensive report that offers actionable recommendations on how the Council, the General Assembly, and other relevant UN bodies can collaborate more effectively to address the complex challenges of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Enhanced cooperation and coordination within the UN system is essential for advancing the shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Sierra Leone also underscores the importance of promoting the equal, full, and effective participation of women in all decision-making processes related to the disarmament as recommended by the Secretary General in his report, Securing Our Common Future, an Agenda for Disarmament. Women play a crucial role in advancing peace and security, and their inclusion in disarmament efforts is essential for achieving sustainable progress in this critical area. In conclusion, Madam President, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the principles of disarmament, non-proliferation, and international peace and security. We recognize the paramount importance of concerted global efforts to address the challenges posed by nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and stand ready to engage constructively with all member states to advance our collective efforts towards a safer and more secure world for present and future generations. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Adgali for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President, for arranging this important meeting. I would also like to express my gratitude to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Executive Secretary Dr. Floyd, and Director Bukachanova for their briefings. Throughout the human history, the evolution of foundational technology has had only one direction. It spreads far and wide. From wheels to the printing press, combustion engines, and electricity, such technology became cheaper and more available. Such proliferations of technology applied to weapons as well. Whether it was bows and arrows or gunpowder, weapons technologies in time disseminated all over the world and then were used. However, one technology bucks the trend. That is nuclear weapons. Witnessing their deadly and devastating impacts in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the international community has managed to contain the use and proliferation of nuclear weapons. Such a colossal feat is not an accidental achievement, but the result of extraordinary and commendable multilateral efforts by the international community. Pledges from both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation have spared us from nuclear apocalypse. The culmination of these efforts is a treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. While the NPT serves as the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime, other key norms and initiatives, such as the CTBT and FMCT, are also crucial for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Madam President, regrettably, however, the current state of affairs indicates that this hard-fought and hard-won architecture is now being challenged more than ever before. First, the threat of the use of nuclear weapons has become an unprecedented concern to the international community. We hear precarious and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric amid Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. Russia's tactical nuclear weapons are now deployed in Belarus, and its CTBT ratification was withdrawn. The New START is suspended. And in another part of the world, rapid and opaque nuclear buildup under the guise of modernization is being reported, while genuine dialogue for disarmament is turned away. All of these developments have decreased the level of confidence on the nuclear weapon states' commitment to disarmament. Second, the prospect of non-proliferation is no less bleak. Indeed, the DPRK, the world's preeminent proliferator, continues to blatantly violate multiple Security Council resolutions and develop its nuclear and missile programs. While we are discussing non-proliferation at this chamber, the DPRK continues its provocations, including yesterday's launches of multiple ballistic missiles, supposedly targeting densely populated areas and key military installations of my country. The DPRK vows to launch 3 more military reconnaissance satellites this year using ballistic missile technology, and provides ballistic missiles to Russia in violation of the Security Council resolutions. Pyongyang now has markedly low threshold for using nuclear weapons. Its aggressive nuclear policy even allows for preemptive strikes against the Republic of Korea, which Kim Jong-un declared as a principal foreign enemy state. And we should be concerned about the IAEA's conclusion that it has lost continuity of knowledge on parts of Iran's ongoing nuclear activities. Third, rapid advancement of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence may add to the existing challenges to the global non-proliferation regime. As the ultimate enabler, AI has the potential to transform all aspects of military affairs. If the governance to ensure responsible use of AI lags behind, the world will be left with more vulnerability, including the potential risk of accidental or unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. Furthermore, new domains such as outer space and cyberspace have introduced new complexities. Placement of nuclear weapons in outer space or illicit activities in cyberspace to gain technology or finance WMDs can undermine the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. Madam President, against this backdrop, the Security Council should stand at the very forefront of addressing these complex yet monumental challenges. First, the Security Council should enforce vital global norms. Through its resolutions and sanctions regimes, the Council must respond to violations of non-proliferation obligations. It should ensure that all sanctions resolutions, which are legally binding on all UN member states, are fully implemented. As a legal maxim goes, impunity always leads to greater violations. The Security Council should also make the best use of its own tools to ensure full implementation of Security Council resolutions, including the subsidiary organs such as 1718 Sanctions Committee and the panel of experts on DPRK. Just as the Security Council took initiative to respond to the threat from linkage between non-state actors and WMDs with Resolution 1540, 20 years ago, the Security Council should take more interest in leading a dialogue and deliberations on the new trends and the crucial new topics of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, in particular concerning AI, cyberspace, and outer space. The Republic of Korea will strive to bring in fresh air in this regard. Third, in doing all these, the Security Council should lead by example. This council is entrusted with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. And if we are able to act on behalf of all member states to carry out our duties, there should be no place for inaction or self-contradictory measures. In this regard, a permanent member and the depository of the NPT should bear a special sense of responsibility, not to shake, but to uphold the decades-old international architecture. especially its military cooperation with DPRK against Security Council's own decisions, would result in the erosion of the very authority and relevance of the Security Council. Madam President and dear colleagues, the film Oppenheimer gives us a lot to reflect on. The quote that they won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they used it, is indeed chilling and prescient. Nuclear weapons were used, and we understand and fear them. Let us take further determined steps to maintain and strengthen the NPT regime in the name of the UN Security Council. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to this noble endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Kamikawa Yoko, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan and President of the Security Council, may I begin by congratulating you on your impeccable stewardship of the Council during the month of March. I'd also like to thank you for convening this debate of high relevance for the United Nations organization. I'd like to highlight the statement of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres and once again acknowledge his action in favor of disarmament, non-proliferation, and world peace. I would also like to express my gratitude for the briefings of our briefers, Mr. Robert Floyd and Madame Gaukar Katsanova. Nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation are a moral and ethical responsibility. The international community should address it with determination and concerted action. This is a critical moment in history where global security, stability, and the existence of future generations are hanging by a thread. It's a fact, indeed, that since their creation, nuclear weapons have placed humanity in the shadows of a possible devastation. The use of nuclear weapons would have disastrous consequences and irreversible fallout for the environment, the world economy, and the very life of our planet. Madam President, it is imperative that all states, especially those with nuclear arsenals, commit to reducing and eliminating their arsenals, and they adopt measures that are tangible to prevent the accidental or deliberate use of these weapons and to foster a climate of trust and cooperation amongst nations. Ecuador reaffirms that the Non-Proliferation Treaty is the cornerstone of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Further, contracting parties should abide by their international obligations under this treaty. The next NPT review conference is an invaluable opportunity to bring about progress and commitments. I hereby issue a call for all states to sign the treaty on banning nuclear weapons, which is a complementary instrument to the NPT. The joint functionality of these two instruments is necessary for the complete ban of nuclear weapons and grants practical action and specific action towards that goal. I reaffirm here the importance of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and highlight the need for it to enter into force soon. My country will continue to promote consolidation of nuclear-free zones, and in so doing, recalls here the Tlatelolco Treaty, which allowed Latin America and the Caribbean to become the first zone free of nuclear weapons in a highly populated and densely populated zone of the planet. Madam President, the mechanisms for monitoring and verification should be strengthened to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to state or non-state actors. The unanimous adoption of Resolution 1540 in April of 2004, in other words, almost 20 years ago now, was a key and timely measure in the efforts undertaken by the Security Council to prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, their vector systems, and related materials to agents that are not state agents. In that regard, Resolution 1540 has become a vital element of the global non-proliferation architecture. The Council has a responsibility to lead global efforts for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The existence of a single additional nuclear weapon increases the risk of global disaster. Therefore, the Council should stand united in its commitment to preventing such an occurrence. That involves the adoption of firm resolutions, respect of decisions already taken, and fostering dialogue between interested parties and the promotion of international cooperation in the area of disarmament and non-proliferation, especially in those topics on this Council's agenda relating to the DPRK and the nuclear issue of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Madam President, my delegation acknowledges the valuable contribution of women in taking decisions and in the practice of disarmament and non-proliferation. This Council should continue working so that women can participate fully in a significant and effective manner in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation processes. It's important to recognize that nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation require a long-term commitment, require perseverance and political determination by all member states. The future of humanity depends on our ability to overcome our differences and to work together towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And as Ecuador never will tire of repeating, there are no good hands for entrusting nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madam President, I would like to first and foremost thank you for organizing this meeting. And I'd like to thank the Secretary General and the other speakers for their briefings. We come together in a context which is unprecedentedly weakening instruments for non-proliferation and mastering weapons. The irresponsible nuclear rhetoric of Russia in the context of its war of aggression against Ukraine reminds us of the imperative of preventing nuclear weapons and the arms race. France reiterates its attachment to the P5 statement of January 2022, which affirms that such a war can never be won and should never be undertaken. We would call upon all weapons states to adhere to it. France stands determined to work towards a world free of nuclear weapons with undiminished security for all. The Non-Proliferation Treaty remains the unavoidable instrument to that end. First, nuclear disarmament can only be achieved through a realistic and progressive approach based on concrete action and measures which take into account the strategic context. It's vital to continue efforts necessary to reduce huge stockpiles of nuclear arsenals around the world. France contributes to these efforts by reducing its own arsenals to the level of strict sufficiency for its own security. We would encourage all weapons states to adopt effective measures of transparency in order to strengthen this. France deplores the suspension in this regard by Russia of its participation in the New START Treaty and urges it to return and overturn that decision. France supports the without delay launch of a conference of disarmament on fissile materials reduction and under the mandate of Shannon. France joins the group of friends of the FMCT geared to promoting this treaty, and we would like to thank Japan for this initiative. And France remains committed to an entry into force of the CTBT as soon as possible, geared to the establishment of zones of weapons-free zones, free of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. We also reiterate our support and attachment to the Treaty of 1967 on weapons in outer space, which bans the placement of nuclear weapons in outer space. The violation of this standard would be an additional destabilizing factor, and we call upon states to respect international law and their obligations under this treaty. Secondly, we would recall firmly here the crises of proliferation which directly threaten international peace and security. North Korea's nuclear and ballistic weapons programs are a violation of the resolutions adopted by this council unanimously, and we are very concerned by the information relating to the delivery of weapons, including ballistic missiles, between Russia and North Korea. And we once again call upon North Korea to halt its destabilizing activities and to commit to discussions with a view to achieving complete, irreversible, and verifiable denuclearization. Escalation of the nuclear weapons program in Iran is accelerating. The recent reports of the IAEA reflect an accumulation of uranium, which is highly enriched, which is well in excess of the limits set forth in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And there is no credible civilian justification for these activities. We're also very alarmed by the fact that there is no work to address the pending issues relating to the safeguards for Iran. Iran cannot ignore any longer its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we remain resolved that Iran should not develop a nuclear weapon. We would enjoin Iran to come back to respecting its international commitments, and we remain prepared to help seek a diplomatic solution. Finally, France is attached to safe and responsible use peacefully of nuclear weapons in strict respect of the IAEA safeguards non-proliferation regime. We're very concerned about the situation of the Zaporizhzhia plant and the illegally occupied by Russia of this plant since March 2022. We reiterate our support to the 7 pillars of the IAEA, to the 5 principles set forth by the Director General of the IAEA to guarantee the safety of this nuclear plant. We call on Russia to put an end to all its militarization and stop fueling the risk of a nuclear accident. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I welcome Your Excellency to the Council to preside over this meeting, and I thank Secretary General Guterres and the other briefers for their briefings. The complete prohibition and the thorough destruction of nuclear weapons and the eventual establishment of a nuclear weapon-free world are an abiding aspiration of the international community. In today's world, the international security environment is undergoing a confluence of changes and turbulence, with the Cold War mentality rearing its ugly head, while the risk of a nuclear arms race and a nuclear conflict is rising, and the issue of nuclear proliferation remains a prominent issue. The road to nuclear disarmament remains long and arduous. Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward the Global Security Initiative, emphasizing the need to adhere to the concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, respect the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, attention to the legitimate security concerns of all countries, resolution of differences and disputes among countries through dialogue, consultation, and peaceful means, and the integrated maintenance of security in both the traditional and non-traditional spheres. The GSI advocates adapting to the profoundly adjusted international scape in the spirit of solidarity and responding to complex and intertwined security challenges with a win-win mindset, with the aim of eliminating the root causes of international conflicts, improving global security governance, and promoting the international security's joint efforts to instill more stability and certainty into our turbulent and changing times, with a view to realizing lasting peace and development in the world. It is the common aspiration and the goal of the international community to build a universally secure world. The countries should join hands in practicing genuine multilateralism, adhere to a concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, resolutely rejecting the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation, continuously strengthening the authority and effectiveness of the NPT Treaty, and joining efforts to promote nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. First, We should adhere to the concept of a common security and shape a stable strategic security environment. President Xi Jinping has repeatedly made it clear that nuclear weapons must never be used and a nuclear war never fought, and that the international community should jointly oppose the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. In 2022, the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states issued a joint statement on the prevention of a nuclear war, emphasizing that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. On that basis, nuclear weapon states should explore feasible measures to reduce strategic risks, negotiate and conclude a treaty on no first use of nuclear weapons against each other, and provide legally binding negative security assurances to non-nuclear weapon states. The countries concerned should reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national and collective security policies, renounce the deployment of a global missile defense system, refrain from seeking the deployment of intermediate range missiles in the Asia-Pacific region or in Europe, and stop nuclear sharing and so-called extended deterrence, so as to maintain the global strategic balance and stability through practical actions. Countries should continue to enhance the safety, reliability, and controllability of AI technology and ensure that relevant weapon systems are under human control at all times. Second, we should adhere to a rational and pragmatic approach and promote the international nuclear disarmament in a gradual and steady manner. Nuclear weapon states should abide by the consensus on nuclear disarmament reached at the successive NPT review conferences and make a public commitment not to seek permanent possession of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are a product of history, and a nuclear disarmament will naturally have a historical process, demanding that countries with vastly different nuclear policies and a number of nuclear weapons should assume the same level of nuclear disarmament and nuclear transparency obligations is not consistent with the logic of history and reality, nor is it in line with international consensus, and as such will only lead the international nuclear disarmament to a dead end. The US allegations against China are totally groundless and do not hold any water. It is precisely the US who should continue to fulfill their special and priority responsibility to further reduce their nuclear arsenals in a drastic and a substantive manner, so as to create conditions for other nuclear weapon states to join the nuclear disarmament process and play a lead by example role recognized by all parties rather than self-styled. Third, we should commit to a political solution and safeguard the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. Non-proliferation hotspot issues, such as the ones on the Korean Peninsula and with Iran, have complex historical background and are closely linked to the continuity of the non-proliferation policies of a relevant country. All parties should adhere to political and diplomatic efforts to address each other's legitimate security concerns through dialogue and balanced solutions, and the United States should abandon the threat of use and the use of sanctions and pressure. The U.S. nuclear submarine cooperation with certain countries carries a high risk of nuclear proliferation. It is a serious violation of the objective and the purpose of the NPT treaty and undermines regional peace and stability. Therefore, corrective measures should be taken to rectify it and be brought back to the right path. Nuclear weapon states should sign and ratify the protocols to the nuclear weapon-free zone treaties as soon as possible, and China reaffirms its readiness to take the lead in signing the protocol to the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty and its firm support for the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other WMDs. Fourth, we should adhere to the original intent of common development and promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. development is the cornerstone of peace and security. The international community should pay attention to the needs of developing countries for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, increase relevant financial and technical assistance, and to help implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The IAEA should play a greater role in promoting cooperation and assistance in areas of nuclear power, applications of nuclear technology, and nuclear safety and security. Relevant countries should stop generalizing the concept of national security, stop drawing lines on the basis of ideology, and stop using under the pretext of non-proliferation export control as a political tool to suppress other countries and to pursue its agenda of decoupling and breaking up the supply chain. Madam President, China has always advocated the complete prohibition of thorough destruction of nuclear weapons. 60 years ago, China solemnly declared that it would not be the first to use nuclear weapons at any time or under any circumstances. This demonstrated the most transparent policy with the most responsible attitude. It has maintained a high degree of stability and continuity and is in itself a major contribution to the international nuclear disarmament. Regardless of changes in the international landscape, China has always abided by this commitment, firmly pursued its nuclear strategy of self-defense, refrained from participating in any form of the nuclear arms race, continued to maintain its nuclear force at the minimal level required for its national security, and continued to work to promote international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I too want to welcome you in the Council. I would like to thank Secretary General Guterres, Executive Secretary Dr. Floyd, and Director Ms. Mukachanova for their valuable insights today. As many of the members of the Council recall today, a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Achieving a world without nuclear weapons remains our common and ultimate goal. However, we are deeply concerned about the continuous erosion of international architecture of non-proliferation. So, Madam President, let me therefore make 3 points for today. First, there is a need to uphold and further strengthen the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. In the current complex global security environment, this is urgent. The Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons remains the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation architecture. Non-proliferation obligations under the NPT and the relevant Security Council resolutions should be consistently implemented. The safeguard system presents an indispensable role in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. We will continue to support the IAEA and its efforts of ensuring that states are honoring their international legal obligations to use nuclear material and technology for peaceful purposes only. At the same time, we deeply appreciate the CTBTO's role in detecting non-proliferation violations and upholding the global norm against nuclear testing. The efforts of the Executive Secretary of Dr. Floyd for CTBT universalization are bearing fruit, as reported by Dr. Floyd this morning. We very much welcome the continuation of these efforts, and at the same time, we regret Russia's revocation of ratification of the treaty. Secondly, we need to end the deadlock of nuclear disarmament. The last 2 NPT review conferences have failed to demonstrate any progress in the field of nuclear disarmament, while bilateral arms reduction treaties have been slowly waning away, most recently with Russia's suspension of the New START treaty. So how to end the deadlock? An NPT-based step-by-step approach combining bilateral and multilateral elements seemed to be the most feasible way forward. So for this reason, Slovenia supports the 2022 incremental steps outlined by the Stockholm Initiative for nuclear disarmament. As long as nuclear weapons exist, the risk of their use remains real. Slovenia is especially concerned with the lowering of thresholds for the use and threats of use of tactical nuclear weapons. Maintaining an option for the first use of low-yield weapons in nuclear doctrines is irresponsible and simply wrong. Thirdly, Ms. Mukachanova reminded us today of the relevance of the Security Council Resolution 984, by which the Council recognized security assurances of the nuclear weapon states against the use of nuclear weapons on non-nuclear weapon states. It also affirmed that the Council will act immediately in the event that non-nuclear states are victims of an act or object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. So we expect that the Council members are able to renew this commitment to NPT member states. And finally, Madam President, women remain understaffed in the fields of nuclear policy, disarmament, and non-proliferation. We know that women are powerful agents of change, and perhaps their full inclusion in nuclear decision-making processes can empower us all to bring about the long-awaited breakthrough in nuclear disarmament efforts towards a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I'm grateful to Japan for convening this important meeting, and to the Secretary General, Dr. Floyd, and Ms. Mukachanova for their briefings. For 50 years, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has been a bulwark for global security, allowing peaceful uses of nuclear technologies to flourish while preventing the erosion of non-proliferation norms. The UK remains committed to full and complete disarmament in line with Article 6 of the NPT. We reaffirm the P5 Leader Statement of 2022 that a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. The UK is the only nuclear weapon state to have reduced to one delivery system, and we maintain a minimum credible deterrent. We have pioneered work in nuclear disarmament verification, championing transparency, and advancing risk reduction. We are one of the largest financial contributors to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization and host 13 of its monitoring facilities. This Council cannot be complacent about nuclear proliferation. We must continue to counter the DPRK's nuclear program, and we urge the DPRK to commit to denuclearization. The 1718 panel of experts carries out important work and must retain the Council's full support. We also call on Iran and Syria to cooperate fully with the IAEA and express grave concern that Iran's nuclear program has never been more advanced than it is today. It is deeply concerning that Russia, who played an important role in building the international non-proliferation and arms control architecture, has suspended its obligations under New START, de-ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and breached resolutions on Iran and DPRK to source weapons for its illegal war in Ukraine. We urge Russia to reaffirm its commitment to its international obligations. Colleagues, our non-proliferation architecture supports and enables the peaceful use of nuclear technologies worldwide. The UK is helping to expand access to peaceful nuclear technology in support of the Sustainable Development Goals through our sustained dialogue on Peaceful Uses initiative. And we've given $4.3 million in funding to the IAEA's Technical Cooperation Fund this year. Next month marks 20 years since this Council adopted Resolution 1540, helping prevent non-state actors access to WMD materials. And I take this opportunity to thank Ecuador for their stewardship. Combating nuclear non-proliferation and promoting disarmament is a global challenge. We call on all states who have not yet done so to ratify the NPT. A strong non-proliferation treaty means a more secure world. The UK is committed to a successful review conference in 2026 and looks forward to working with all UN members to this end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Thank you, Madam President. As did my colleagues, I would like to start by thanking Japan for putting this important issue on the Council's agenda. I would also like to thank the Secretary General, Ms. Mukhajanova, and Dr. Floyd for their interventions and their commitment. The suffering of the hundreds of thousands of victims of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was etched on the collective conscience of humanity in August 1945 and must never be forgotten. Awareness of this traumatic rupture is underlined by the fact that the first resolution adopted by the General Assembly in January 1946 was dedicated to nuclear disarmament. And for decades, preventing the further use of nuclear weapons was the real raison d'etre of the United Nations. Our organization has played a decisive role in this respect by enabling dialogue even between the harshest opposing sides, even in moments of extreme tension. But we should remember that when the world was on the brink of collapse during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the leaders at the time were able to take a step towards each other in order to contain the most frightening dangers. This moment of maximum tension led to the beginning of an agreement and the development of multiple nuclear arms control instruments, including the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. And we've heard today it was said a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. At a time of geopolitical volatility, when the risk of nuclear weapons being used is unprecedented since the end of the Cold War, it is our responsibility to ensure that this truth, lived by the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, affirmed by Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan in 1985, and reaffirmed by the Permanent Five in January 2022, does not remain a dead letter. In order to achieve this, we must first return the path of nuclear disarmament, as the Secretary General emphasizes in his new agenda for peace. Maintaining an international order based on international law and rules is essential for our collective security. Progress towards nuclear disarmament is an obligation under the NPT, and the commitments undertaken in this treaty remain valid and must be implemented. We are concerned by the denunciation, even violation, of essential nuclear arms control instruments. The three largest nuclear powers have still not ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We call on them and on other states listed in Annex 2 of the CTBT to sign and ratify this instrument without delay. Furthermore, this Council should play a key role in strengthening these norms. It should draw inspiration from its past actions, for example, its Resolution 984 of 1995, in which it granted negative security assurances to non-nuclear weapon states. At the same time, Madam President, we must reduce nuclear risks. This is neither a substitute nor a prerequisite for nuclear disarmament. But the risks posed by the nuclear arms race are undeniable, and the recent nuclear rhetoric is to be condemned. In addition, new technologies, particularly in the field of digital technology and artificial intelligence, pose unprecedented challenges. Switzerland calls on the nuclear weapon states to conduct a sustained dialogue on nuclear risk reduction with a view to adopting concrete commitments. We encourage the P5 and nuclear weapon states to consider tangible confidence-building measures, for example, by establishing crisis communication channels to avoid misunderstandings between nuclear weapon states. We also call on all states possessing nuclear weapons to be transparent about their policies, doctrines, and arsenals. And finally, the global non-proliferation architecture must be maintained and strengthened, nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation being two sides of the same coin. the NPT has made a major contribution to limiting the number of states possessing nuclear weapons, hence the importance of doing everything possible to ensure its continued existence. Major concerns arise from the rapid development of nuclear and ballistic programs in DPRK, the gradual unraveling of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the many open questions raised by the International Atomic Energy Agency's reports on Iran. Switzerland recalls that the resolutions of this Council are binding and must be implemented by all member states. We also call on all states to apply the highest standards of nuclear safeguards through a comprehensive safeguards agreement complemented by an additional protocol. Madam President, this Council has primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. We must therefore provide responses to the current nuclear risks. The 5 permanent members have a special responsibility to advance nuclear disarmament. They also have a duty to respect and maintain the pillars of the non-proliferation architecture. The renewal of the mandate of the expert group on sanctions imposed on the DPRK later on this week will be a further demonstration of this commitment. And as chair of the committee, I call upon all members of this council to work constructively to preserve this important tool of our work. As the Secretary General said in his address to the 10th NPT Review Conference, peace cannot take place in the absence of trust and mutual respect, and all states have a responsibility to help rebuild this trust. In this vein, the Pact of the Future represents an important opportunity to build on the lessons of the past by reaffirming and resuming the path towards a world free of nuclear weapons. Let us shoulder this responsibility now in the present. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the Japanese presidency for convening this briefing on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. I wish to also thank Secretary General Guterres for his statement and Executive Director Floyd and Director Mukatsanova for their briefings. Madam President, the current geopolitical environment is characterized by unprecedented levels of volatility, with multiple conflicts within, between, and among states. In many instances, they involve the use of inherently indiscriminate weapons that violate multiple disarmament instruments and result in higher numbers of civilian deaths. All of this is happening against the backdrop of dangerous nuclear weapons rhetoric that seeks to normalize the threat of use of such weapons. To proceed along this path is to walk headfirst into a global catastrophe. We must, therefore, frontally address threats to the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. In doing so, there is need to enhance the role of the Security Council, strengthen the implementation of key non-proliferation instruments, ensure the responsible use of emerging technologies in nuclear disarmament, and ensure women's participation in disarmament discussions and decision-making. Firstly, the Security Council has an important role to play in risk reduction by enhancing awareness and implementation of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation instruments. As established in Article 26 of the Charter and subsequent Security Council resolutions, this Council has a duty to promote peace with the least diversion of resources for armaments and a responsibility to confront threats posed to the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture, including any non-compliance with such obligations. Divesting from armaments can play a critical role in reducing the risk of a nuclear conflict. However, it is quite evident that emphasis is placed on the maintenance, modernization, and acquisition of nuclear arsenals, while less resources are invested in development initiatives and in advancing the implementation of key non-proliferation instruments. This must change, and for the better. Notwithstanding the responsibilities of other organs of the United Nations, the Security Council must intensify its engagement and advance the regulation and reduction of armaments, including nuclear weapons, and other weapons of mass destruction. In reducing the risk of nuclear conflict and strengthening the Non-Proliferation Treaty and associated regime, focus must also be placed on advancing implementation efforts of the NPT and other key instruments, including the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has made considerable progress, but more must be done. Madam President, Guyana acknowledges that new and emerging technologies pose challenges to the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regimes. In this regard, we advocate for these technologies to be regulated and used responsibly for the greater good. At the same time, we also advocate for their enhanced use in verification and monitoring to advance the global disarmament and non-proliferation agenda. Finally, on the role of women, there is no doubt that women can contribute to achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. I wish to recall that Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security stresses the importance of women's equal participation in the maintenance and promotion of peace and security, and the need to increase their role in decision-making. As a signatory of the Women, Peace, and Security Shared Commitments, Guyana endorses the call for the UN to lead by example in ensuring the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace processes. We strongly believe that women must be part of disarmament discussions at all levels, as they are disproportionately affected in conflicts and still underrepresented in decision-making. Madam President, colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate Guyana's commitment to the advancement of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation agenda, and to reaffirm that the only means of preventing the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is through their total elimination. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President, and I also thank the Secretary General and the briefers for their insightful briefings. We thank Japan for holding this timely meeting. In the context of increased geopolitical tensions, the Security Council has an obligation to promote and strengthen nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, with the goal of achieving a nuclear-free world. Malta has a long-standing and unwavering commitment to complete nuclear disarmament. The use of nuclear weapons can never be justifiable or acceptable. We can no longer allow the so-called deterrence doctrine. It is a paradoxical misconception and a threat to our existence. As the Secretary General noted in his new agenda for peace, the disarmament architecture is eroding. The non-proliferation regime is being violated. The two are inextricably linked and must be advanced in an organic way. Risk reduction can never be a substitute for disarmament. Ultimately, the best way to ensure non-proliferation is the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Civil society and women's peace movements also play a crucial role in this field. We welcome all efforts to promote the full, active, and meaningful participation of women at all levels in all disarmament and non-proliferation fora. President, despite the failure of the last two review conferences to adopt an outcome document, the NPT remains the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. As a state party to the treaty, we are fully committed to its objectives, and we reaffirm the need to achieve its universalization. We hope that the next review conference will bring substantive results. The non-proliferation and disarmament regime is based on the balanced implementation of the three pillars of the treaty. In this connection, we call on the nuclear weapon states to fully implement Article 6. Current tensions cannot be an excuse for the delay. Rather, they should be a reason to accelerate implementation. Malta has also signed and ratified the TPNW, a landmark agreement that fills a legal gap as the first outright prohibition of nuclear weapons. The treaty is fully compatible with and complementary to the NPT. It strengthens It strengthens the IAEA safeguard systems. It also recognizes the gendered impact of nuclear weapons, including with regards to victims' assistance. We will continue to advocate for its universalization with the goal of creating momentum to revive international disarmament talks. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is another fundamental pillar of the non-proliferation regime and is widely recognized as one of the most successful international instruments. We reaffirm our full commitment to the treaty, and we commend the work of the Executive Director Floyd towards its universalization. We deeply regret the withdrawal of the treaty by one of the Annex II states and continue to urge all states to ratify it without further delay. President, the non-proliferation regime has been severely undermined by the DPRK. Pyongyang has continuously advanced its unlawful WMD program, including through the relentless testing of ballistic missiles. Such actions are in violation of multiple Council resolutions as well as sanctions regimes. They contribute to the erosion of the non-proliferation regime. As we have said before, the threat posed by DPRK's WMD program goes beyond the Korean Peninsula. Persistent silence and failure to act by this Council will embolden potential proliferators around the world. This Council has proven its ability to come together on non-proliferation when it unanimously adopted Resolution 1540 20 years ago. We must continue to build upon these efforts. To this end, Malta will continue to support all efforts by the Security Council and other bodies. We also look forward to the next preparatory conference of the 2026 NPT Review Conference. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm grateful to Japan for organizing this timely meeting. I would like to highlight the effort of Japan towards the realization of the objective of disarmament and non-proliferation. I would like to express my gratitude to the Secretary General for his statement. I thank Mr. Robert Floyd for his briefing, and I listen also carefully to Mrs. Mukhadzinova. As we meet today, we are deeply concerned about the heightened international tensions and the looming threat of nuclear war. Nuclear disarmament is not merely a legal obligation, but a moral imperative, since nuclear weapons continue to represent the most serious threat to humankind and to the survival of humanity. The catastrophic humanitarian consequences of these weapons are a reminder of their devastating effect. We are alarmed by the lack of progress in fulfilling nuclear disarmament commitments, despite the effort of most member states. In this context, I would like to highlight the following key points. First, as a constant advocate of the NPT, Algeria urges nuclear weapon states to honor their obligation under Article 6 and to take tangible steps toward nuclear disarmament. We also call upon to non-NPT parties to join the treaties as non-nuclear weapon parties without delay and without conditions. The inability to reach consensus on the two previous NPT review conferences is a major concern for Algeria. We implore all state parties, particularly nuclear weapon state, to engage constructively to uphold the NPT regime integrity. Second, Algeria welcomes the entry into force of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the adoption of the Vienna Declaration and Vienna Action Plan. Third, we stress the critical importance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty coming into force and urge the remaining Annex II countries to sign and ratify it. 4. Nuclear weapons-free zones are essential building blocks toward a world without nuclear weapons. As one of the first African states to ratify the Pelindaba Treaty, Algeria is steadfast in its commitment in its implementation. We also emphasize the imperative of establishing a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and commend the successful convening of the UN conference dedicated to this objective. The condemnation voiced by the participating members of the conference, denouncing Israel's nuclear threats, particularly threatening to use nuclear weapons on civilians in Gaza, must be translated into meaningful action. In closing, Algeria calls for a legally binding instrument on negative security assurances for all non-nuclear weapon states and for the negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material, including the stocks. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We would like to thank the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, Mr. Robert Floyd. We thank them for their statements. We also listened very carefully to the Program Director at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, Ms. Gauhar Mukhadjanova. The meeting today is a very good opportunity for us to recall what catastrophic consequences the use of a nuclear weapon can have. And we do understand how extremely sensitive this issue is for Japan, the country which became a victim of the United States using of the nuclear weapon. As a result of the nuclear bombing by the American armed forces in August 1995, the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. And this is the only instance in the history of mankind where the nuclear weapon was used not for the purposes of testing, but for military and political purposes, and was used against civilians. We regret that the Japanese representative themselves multiplying their propaganda fakes about the supposedly threatening nuclear rhetoric from Russia. do not find the courage in themselves to directly point the country responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of their own citizens. And that country is the United States of America. And that is precisely why it is principally important to maintain the historical memory about the horrendous consequences of that reckless step undertaken by Washington, no matter how long ago it was. Washington, which never repented for that, as far as we can tell, and drew no conclusions from that. The fact that no one amongst the members of the Security Council who talked about Hiroshima and Nagasaki today, not one of them mentioned the responsibility for that by Washington, only eggs our American colleagues on and feeds into their illusion of their infallibility and impunity. Colleagues, please think yourselves, what kind of role in resolving international issues you can claim if you have such an ostrich-like policy, if you are afraid of calling things out for what they are, even in this historical perspective. Particularly important this becomes when we look at today's disheartening situation in the area of international security and strategic stability. And this is an outcome of a consistent, long-standing policy by the United States and allies, and the policy is aimed at undermining the international architecture of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation of WMDs. Trying to have the maximum free rein possible, Washington consistently withdrew from foundational agreements here, such as, for example, the Treaty on Anti-Ballistic Missile Systems, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, or Washington made sure that implementing specific agreements would become impossible. And that was the case when it came to the Treaty on Conventional Forces in Europe and the bilateral treaty on measures for further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. By now, the West has completely thrown off all disguise and is not even trying to hide that it wants to inflict a strategic defeat on my country. The rampant Russophobe course by the United States and allies is fraught with the danger of escalation, which in turn could become a direct confrontation between nuclear states. We have heard today from our Western colleagues a whole range of absurd allegations and accusations, including the ones in the context of the subject of Ukraine. They are completely divorced from reality. The leadership of my country has underscored on many occasions that they do not hold water. Under the conditions under which nuclear weapons can be used are very clearly stated in our nuclear doctrine, and we follow that religiously. We regret the fact that there was not a word of condemnation uttered today by those who are really fueling the nuclear rhetoric. For example, the Minister of Defense of the United States, Lloyd Austin, who stated that the use of the full range of nuclear means, including nuclear weapons, within the framework of extended deterrence on the Korean Peninsula. Or the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who threatened that, I quote, Iran has to come face to face with a real nuclear threat, end of quote. We also remember how easily it seemed to the people in London to press the nuclear, would seem to them to press the nuclear weapon. And we can see that in Paris, that there is a growing nuclear rhetoric, and this can plunge us into the depths of nuclear confrontation. We regret the fact that the absolute majority of initiatives undertaken by Western colleagues are packaged in very beautiful rhetoric, but they are empty when you go for the essence of them. And at best, they are self-promotion on their part. For example, what was mentioned by the United States, a draft resolution by the Security Council and non-placement of nuclear weapons in outer space, which was submitted at the end of last week. According to our preliminary assessment, this is a very politicized document which is divorced from reality. And there is nothing surprising here, because the wording that it contains have not been worked out at all by the experts, nor were they discussed as specialized international platforms such as a Conference for Disarmament or a UN Committee on Outer Space. We're left, therefore, with a very firm impression that this is just yet another propaganda stunt by Washington. Madam President, of course, we all would like to wake up one day in a world which is free of conflict, which has no strategic risks and dangers. We have consistently shared the noble goal of building a world which is free of nuclear weaponry. But at this point, this goal seems to be fairly remote. This is a long-term remote perspective. Having nuclear weapons at this stage is an important factor in maintaining strategic balance. It's important to understand that upending this balance will plunge the world into endless wars and attempts to establish hegemony by force. Real progress towards nuclear disarmament can only be achieved on the basis of carefully considered phased measures which are not contradicting the principle of not diminishing anyone's security and not contradicting the efforts to maintain strategic balance. We need to have a comprehensive approach here and act in line with the letter and spirit of Article 6 of the NPT without trying to pluck individual elements from the overall context of general and full disarmament. At the same time, the responsibility for improving the international situation and as a consequence of that, for the implementation of the disarmament provisions of the treaty is borne by both nuclear and non-nuclear states. There is no shortcut towards nuclear zero. This is a goal that cannot be achieved if one instantly outlaws nuclear weapons or tries to create a timeline during which nuclear weapons are to be eliminated. How can you possibly predict when it will be that the humankind will abandon the military way of resolving differences? No one knows the answer to this question. And that is why the idea of an immediate unconditional rejection of nuclear weapons, which we have in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, is a counterproductive idea. It's an erroneous idea. And under current conditions, essentially is pure populism. Such an approach, which does not take into account the realities of strategic stability or security interests of nuclear weapons, will lead to growing contradictions between states and will undermine the authority of the NPT. It's important to take into account also that for the purposes of discussing nuclear disarmament and proliferation, we have dedicated platforms at the NPT review process, the first committee of UNGA, Conference on Disarmament, the UN Disarmament Commission, and we do not see a convincing reason for discussing the topic of nuclear disarmament within the Security Council as well. It considers non-proliferation as it pertains to specific countries and also through its subsidiary committee 1540. It looks there into issues of preventing WMD ending up in the hands of non-state actors. We are very concerned by the fact that against a background of the breakdown of a system of agreements on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, what is being tested, also serially tested, is a non-proliferation regime. And that is one of the foundational elements of the international security. More than half a century history of the NPT shows that it's relevant for all member states, both for those who are nuclear states and those who do not possess nuclear weapons. Let's also remember that the specific characteristic of the NPT, which enabled for its signing and ensuring that it's nearly universal in nature, is the fact that it has a very calibrated balance between three foundational components: nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear disarmament, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. As was shown by the outcome of the 10th Review Conference of the NPT in 2022 and the outcome of the first session of the PrepCom for the Review Conference in 2026, the divergences on the issue of nuclear disarmament continue deepening. Some Western states are also throwing fuel into the fire here when they politicize a discussion in order to push forward their own agenda of the moment. Let me recall here that that is exactly how the outcome document of the Review Conference of 2022 got buried, when it saw deliberate introduction of provocative and a priori unacceptable anti-Russian passages which have nothing to do with the goal of nuclear non-proliferation. Madam President, the Russian Federation is firmly committed to the statement that the nuclear war cannot be won and should not be waged. And that is precisely why we need to prevent armed conflicts between nuclear states. In this regard, we expect that our Western colleagues will abandon their very dangerous and destructive course. We are open within the new NPT review process to a constructive dialogue with all countries interested in reaching a consensus understanding on how we can create preconditions for further nuclear disarmament, and to doing this on the basis of strengthening international security and taking all parties' interests into account. Madam President, as regards the issue of the strategic dialogue between the US and the Russian Federation with the aim of controlling nuclear arms, well, they cannot be divorced from the general political and military context. The basis for such a work, given that the Western countries are trying to inflict strategic defeat on my country and their refusal to take into account our essential interests, we do not see them. Any interaction will only be possible if the United States and NATO review their anti-Russian course, and when they show that they are ready to participate in comprehensive dialogue, taking into account all of our strategic stability factors and removing all of the concerns that we have about our security. We will be guided not by beautiful rhetoric and empty appeals, but by facts and actions, which now are showing that there is no interest on behalf of the United States and allies to have a serious conversation. The kind of conversation which, as we have seen today, the whole world is interested in. Hysterics, threats from Washington, London, and Brussels do not impress us at all and do not change the general picture. The sooner our opponents realize that and stop shifting the focus of the discussion, the greater the chance that what was mentioned by the Secretary General, the doomsday clock, will at least slow down and ideally will reverse its course. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.